Benjamin Franklin is remembered today as the great inventor, the man who protected the world from the terrors of lightning. He is also remembered as one of America's founding fathers. But this leaves out much of his story. That this future revolutionary was in fact a very wealthy man with aristocratic aspirations. That for much of his life, he considered himself more an Englishman than an American. It would take Franklin a long time to give up his attachment to England. When he finally did side with the cause of independence, it would bring about the greatest personal tragedy of his life.
To Catherine Ray, begone business for the next hour, and let me chat a little with my Katie. You asked me in your last letter if everyone loves me as you do. Well, I must confess, don't be jealous, that many more people love me than ever before. Since I last saw you, I've done some things for the province for which people thank me and praise me, and now they love me. Or at least they say they love me, like you used to do. But I'm sure if I asked them for any real favors, they would, like you, as readily refuse me. So what's the real advantage of being loved?
In the winter of 1755, while visiting his relations in Boston, Franklin meets a very beautiful young woman, Catherine Ray. He happily agrees to accompany her on the trip home, she to Rhode Island, he back to Philadelphia and his wife and children. Franklin will see Catherine Ray in person only 3 more times, but they will continue to correspond all the rest of his long life.
Your absence from me increases rather than lessens my affections for you. Tell me you're well and that you love me 1,000th as much as I love you. Then I'll be content.
It is a classic situation. A man nearly 50, at the height of his scientific fame, basking in his newly discovered powers to impress and charm a girl half his age. She, in turn, glories in the impact that she's making on this famous man.
I am sending you some sugared plums made with my own hands, each one sweetened just as you used to like. Katie.
Dear, dear Katie, your plums have arrived safe and were sweet, not only from the sugar, but from the touch of your dear hands. Mrs. Franklin enjoyed them as well. Your letters of affection compel me to give you a little fatherly arithmetic lesson. Find yourself a good husband. Then you must practice addition of his money by minding the household finances, subtract all unnecessary expenses, and have no divisions between you. Multiplication? Yes, I'd have happily taught you multiplication myself, but you refused to learn.
She and he carried on the most fascinating flirtation for years. And Franklin claimed that he was trying to seduce her and that she toyed with him and so forth. But I honestly don't believe anything ever came of it. It was a game that he loved to play with women.
With Catherine Ray, as with other young women, Franklin will act the role of father figure, teacher, and flirt. His attraction to young women and theirs to him has given Franklin a reputation as a womanizer. There is no evidence that his playful words ever led to anything more serious, but he is to enjoy the charm and respect the intelligence of women throughout his long life.
Adieu, dear good girl. Alas, I may be going to England for some time. I just couldn't leave without writing you.
A new phase in Franklin's life is about to begin. The colony of Pennsylvania is sending him to England on official business. Franklin has been to London as a young man and is eager to return. He is outgrowing America.
The Franklin who went to England at age 51 is both the same Franklin who went to England at age 18 and an altogether different man. He's of course older, he's wiser, he's a public figure in many countries. The kite, that blasted kite with its key, made him a celebrity. He knew who he was.
Franklin had wanted to bring his whole family with him to London, but his wife, Deborah, is terrified of ocean travel and refuses to come. She stays in Philadelphia with their daughter, Sally. The one family member Franklin insists accompany him to England is his beloved son, William. The father had always involved William in his many projects.
Whether it was on science experiments or in the post office or in the legislature or on the frontier, they were inseparable. Too close, I think.
In the summer of 1757, Franklin and son arrive in London. Now 27 years old, William Franklin is handsome, bright, and eager for new adventures. As a young colonial from a distant outpost of the British Empire, William is overwhelmed.
From the moment I arrived in this great metropolis, all my attention was consumed with the noise and bustle of the streets and the infinite variety of new sights. And now, there are the appointments with politicians and philosophers.
Father and son rent 4 rooms on Craven Street. It is in the center of London, a short walk from the clubs and coffee houses, the offices of government, the theaters, and busy streets of London's dazzling nightlife.
Samuel Johnson celebratedly said he was tired of London, is tired of life. London was the center of much that made being human exciting, and that was for Franklin a magnet.
He reveled in London society, and he had a running account with a wine merchant up the street. He joined 60 different eating clubs so that he never had to cook a meal or stay home for one. He rented a coach. He thought about having his coat of arms put on the door of it. He went around with William tracing their ancestral roots, their genealogy. He was an entirely different Franklin in England from the poor, simple Benjamin of Philadelphia.
He bought the right wigs, he bought the right clothes. He knew when you go to England that you must play the part of a gentleman or you will get absolutely nowhere. And so he fit right into London society just as much as his son did.
Franklin has been sent to England by the Pennsylvania Assembly on a mission of crucial importance to the colony. In the previous century, the entire province had been granted by the king to William Penn, and the Penn family still controls 3/4 of the immense colony. Unlike everyone else who owns land in Pennsylvania, they pay not a penny in taxes.
They thought the colony's government pretty much existed to secure the revenues of the Penn family. For Franklin, that was essentially feudalism, and he despised that, the idea that a moneyed family in Great Britain would use a colony strictly as a source of revenue for its lifestyle.
Franklin's mission is to try and force Thomas Penn, son of the founder, to begin paying taxes. It is one thing to have an important reputation as a scientist. It is quite another to have any real influence in the genteel world of imperial politics.
Mr. Franklin's fame means nothing here. His playing with electricity is only of interest to a particular set of people. Few men of any consequence have even heard of him. The important people, the ones who are to decide the dispute between us, are all friends of mine.
The meeting between Thomas Penn and Franklin takes place in January of 1758. Penn begins on the offensive, denying the fact that the Assembly has any right to tax him. In fact, that it has any rights at all.
I answered that, according to his father's charter, which founded Pennsylvania, and then I quoted it to him, the Assembly of Pennsylvania shall have all the power and privileges of any assembly formed by freeborn subjects of England. Aha, he says. But my father didn't have any authority from the crown to grant this right. And then he laughs, snorting like a donkey. I was astounded.
He's a vile liar. That's not what I said or did. The rights of freeborn Englishmen. Pfft. The Germans settled Pennsylvania because there was good farmland there. They'd never even heard of my father's charter. In any case, it's over. I'll have no further conversations for any reason whatsoever with this tribune of the people.
Thomas is enraged. When I meet him anywhere, he looks at me with a strange mixture of hatred, anger, fear, and vexation. I've absolutely no regrets for calling him a swindler. That description is completely justified. I hope it sticks in his liver.
Franklin was a self-made man. He had gradually clawed his way up in the world, and he had become a world-famous figure. I suppose Franklin thought he was due a certain amount of respect for what he had accomplished. And Penn probably thought that if you weren't born rich, you didn't deserve respect.
Franklin will never win his battle with Thomas Penn. This is not the New World, but the Old. And Franklin is up against something much bigger than one arrogant aristocrat. In the summer, the lords and gentlemen of government leave the smoke and heat of London for their country estates, and Franklin, too, goes traveling. While visiting Lord Shelburne, he amazes everyone with a demonstration of his recent scientific discoveries.
Wherever I go traveling, I always put a little oil in the hollow joint of my bamboo cane so I can perform this small experiment. When I come upon a pond whose surface is made rough by the wind, I pour the small amount of oil onto it. The oil spreads with amazing speed, making part of the pond as smooth as a looking glass.
The waves were all still, and he speculated for pages how to explain this phenomenon. Understanding how it stills the waves is not actually that elementary, even today, as with most things involving hydrodynamics and all the rest. But a good part of it is a change in surface tension. Surface tension is like a film, and the oil disrupts it, lowers it dramatically, so that when the wind comes over the water, it doesn't form waves nearly as well.
Franklin travels around England and Scotland, meeting some of the great thinkers of the age. He visits James Watt and sees a demonstration of his steam engine, which is soon to transform the world. Franklin becomes friends with men like David Hume, the philosopher, Joseph Priestley, the discoverer of oxygen, and William Strahan, the most important publisher in England.
Franklin has talents and abilities in almost every branch of human science, and he's friends with the geniuses of the country. But he also knows how to chat with ordinary people at their level. As for myself, I've never met anyone who sees things more thoroughly as I do. If we ever disagree on anything, he quickly and with good humor pours in such light on the subject as to immediately convince me that I am wrong.
These were not the great officials, the great office holders of the British Empire. They were people who were significant in another kind of non-governmental world, the world of science and philosophy and letters. Among them, he was at home, and they honored him for his genuine qualities.
It is the densest happiness I've ever had in my life. The learning and wisdom and dazzling people I found there in such plenty will live on forever in my memory.
Provinciae Pennsylvaniae Deputatus.
Franklin receives an honorary doctorate from St. Andrews University in Scotland and another from no less than Oxford University.
Onatissimus vir Benjaminus Franklin Armiger.
Mr. Franklin, with 2 years of formal education, is now the famous Dr. Franklin, honored citizen of the Western world.
Debbie, I wish I could tell you when I'm coming back. I hope if I have to stay here another winter, it will be more agreeable than the time I've spent up to now in England. I must bring this business with Penn to some conclusion. Your loving husband.
My dear, I had a letter from Sister Meekum. Her youngest child is dead. Oh, maybe I told you that before. The marble fireplace you sent arrived safe. Mr. Hall desires to be remembered, and, well, I can't mention all the names, because everybody wants to be remembered to you. Your affectionate wife.
Deborah the Devoted. He left home on and off for 15 years. Now, this is just unbelievable to us as 21st century people. You could leave your home, you could leave your wife, you could leave businesses scattered all over the East Coast for 15 years. How's it going to continue? Deborah is how it continued. A perfect example is in 1757. He says, well, Deborah, I'm going to go to Great Britain. I'll be right back. I know we're getting ready to build a house, but don't worry, I'll be right back, and don't build the house till I get back. He got on the boat, and Deborah immediately began to build the house.
During their long marriage, Franklin and his wife choose to gloss over their partner's inadequacies with words of affection. He calls her his dear child, and she, in warm, compassionate, intensely human letters, also calls him
My dearest child. I had a visit from a man who had just seen you in London, and he tells me you now look well, which, for me, is the next best thing to seeing you. Mr. Mickle lies dead, and he was walking about fine the day before he dropped. Brother Potter is very poorly. 3 weeks under a violent fit of the gout in the limbs and stomach, and he says his heart. I went up to see him and told him to live healthy like me and my pappy, but he thinks he's so much smarter than me, he'd never follow my advice. Adieu, my dear. Take care of yourself, for everyone's sake, but particularly for your affectionate wife.
Deborah does not often complain of Franklin's absence. Too busy living, too awed by the miracle of remaining alive while death stalks all around her. If she ever takes time to meditate upon her fate, Deborah probably considers herself a lucky woman. It is 1762. Franklin and his son William have been in London for 5 years. Franklin is becoming worried that his son is losing himself in London high society.
All my time has been taken up with the multiple diversions and entertainments of this bewitching city. Even now, I should be asleep. The watchman's voice is calling past 5 in the morning, and my candle is almost burned down. Such is my hurried life.
William had mixed with Philadelphia's upper class, but in London he is experiencing a whole new order of wealth and opulence.
Money, leisure, and property. I think it totally ruined the son. The father could put the brakes on and go back to business. For the son, it was a new way of life.
He's tall and proper, very much the beau, but he's acquiring habits of laziness. Not in the least interested in business. He seems to think he's going to live off my money. I've assured him that I fully intend to spend what little I have on myself.
To be the son of Benjamin Franklin must have been terrifically exciting and terrifying at the same time. But the father, I think, really loved William, because I think he saw him as his perfect experiment, where he could invent someone he would have liked to have been himself if he hadn't been the son of a tradesman who made soap and candles.
Now Franklin seizes an opportunity to advance his son, which is beyond anyone's imagining.
The whole business was transacted so rapidly that not a tittle of it escaped until it was seen in the public papers. Then it was too late. There wasn't a single thing I could do to put a stop to this shameful affair.
Franklin's scientific fame has given him access to friends in high places, including a close advisor to King George III. Working feverishly behind Penn's back, he pulls off one of the most amazing coups in American colonial history.
We are pleased to appoint William Franklin, Esquire, to be governor of the province of New Jersey. It is our pleasure that you should prepare for him drafts of a commission and instructions.
Royal Governor, the king's representative in the colonies. Up to now, this top job had been given mainly to influential Britons. Franklin has achieved for his son the highest honor any colonist could hope for. In the hierarchical world of commoners and gentry, he has made his son an officer of the British Empire.
It's a great success story. Runaway boy with 3 biscuits under his arm, penniless and wet in Philadelphia, has a son who becomes a royal governor. It doesn't get much better than that.
I have ordered from Chamberlain 2 prints for the governor's mansion. The picture by Wilson of my father, and a portrait of our king.
In 1763, Benjamin Franklin and his son can see nothing but a bright future for the British Empire. England's glory will be America's glory.
For many years now, I've believed that the foundations, grandeur, and future stability of Britain lie in America. Like other foundations, they are low and unseen, but I believe they are strong enough to support the greatest political structure human wisdom has ever built, the British Empire.
He's in his element. He couldn't be happier. He's living the good life as he understood it. And as I like to say, there was no reason it should ever end.
At this point in history, all Americans, not just Franklin, are proud to be part of the most powerful empire on earth. All that is soon to change. It is called the stamp tax. In 1765, Parliament passes a law decreeing that everything on paper, from playing cards to legal documents, is to be imprinted with a revenue stamp, a tax payable directly to the British government. The colonists are outraged. Franklin, separated from America by 3,000 miles and the months it takes for letters to cross the ocean, misjudges the mood of the colonies.
Let's be frugal. Our own laziness taxes us more than kings and parliaments.
Now, Franklin was totally stunned when the news came pouring back across the Atlantic that all up and down the American coast there was this furious outrage over paying this tax, and riots and stamp commissioners were being hanged in effigy.
Franklin makes a huge political mistake by recommending a friend, John Hughes, for the post of Pennsylvania's stamp tax collector.
They're now saying that you had planned the Stamp Act, and that you're the one getting it sent over here.
In other colonies, mobs are ransacking and tearing down the houses of stamp tax officials. Franklin's friend, John Hughes, is hung in effigy and prepares for the worst. Next, the mob threatens Franklin's house. There they meet Deborah.
When the mobs were assembling, Deborah was told that she should leave the house. Instead, she sent her daughter, Sally, their daughter, to New Jersey, where Franklin's son was the governor, and she remained alone in the house and said she was going to defend her house.
But I said I was sure you'd done nothing to hurt nobody, nor had I given offense to any person. So I wouldn't show the least uneasiness or move. And if anyone came to disturb me, I'd show them my resentment and be properly affronted.
A-F-R-U-N-T-E-D, as she spells it, if anybody thought otherwise.
So cousin Davenport and brother came, and we fetched a few guns, and I set up the best sort of defense on the stairs as I could manage by myself. And I made one room into a magazine.
I honor the courage you showed in that time of danger. The woman deserves a good house who is so determined to defend it. Is it the clergy spreading rumors that I had planned the Stamp Act? I should thank them that they don't also blame me for Adam's fall and the damnation of all mankind.
Franklin had learned from science that if the facts no longer support your theory, you must be flexible enough to change your theory. The facts, he realizes, are these. Protests over the stamp tax are colony-wide and deeply felt. If he does not do something quickly, he will be destroyed politically. From a passive supporter of the tax, Franklin becomes its most outspoken critic. He begins a propaganda campaign in the British press, publishing this cartoon showing a helpless, chopped-up British Empire deprived of her American colonies.
What was the feeling of America towards Great Britain before 1763?
The best in the world. They not only respected you, but had a true affection for Great Britain, for its laws, customs,
Franklin
and
is the
manners.
star witness when the issue of the stamp tax is brought before Parliament. He expresses American opposition to the tax in language that the leaders of this trading and manufacturing nation will really understand.
And if we do not repeal this act?
You will find they will stop buying your manufactured goods. The goods they take from Britain are either necessities or luxuries. The first, cloth and clothing, they can make at home. The second, they can do without.
Parliament repeals the stamp tax. In America, Franklin's reputation soars. He will soon be appointed official agent for 4 colonies and is now unofficial spokesman for all of America. For most normal mortals, all this would be considered a full-time job. But Franklin somehow finds time for his true passion, inventing.
I was charmed by the sweet sound coming from a drinking glass when you pass a wet finger around its rim. What if I could make an instrument with tuned glasses so these sounds could be made by a person sitting in front of it? I experimented with various forms the instrument would take and had glass blown to different sizes accordingly. I call it the glass harmonica.
He probably saw somebody playing a system of glasses that were mounted in a frame, frantically rubbing their fingers around the rims, trying to play melodies, harmonies, and chords. Well, Franklin took that idea, and rather than rubbing your fingers around the rims, let's get the rims to go around your fingers.
Mozart and Beethoven composed for Franklin's new instrument, and it is famous all through his lifetime. Franklin has always been fascinated with music. Like the modern advertising man, he knows that if you can put your message into a song, people will remember it. In the decade to come, the tune will remain God Save the King, but soon the two sides will be singing different words.
Order! 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 Order!
Parliament has repealed the Stamp Act, but it does not admit defeat and continues to assert its right to tax the colonies.
Power and authority to bind the colonies and people of America.
Over the next decade, Parliament attempts to levy tariffs on glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. And with each new tax, the colonists fight back with protests, boycotts, and organized violence. Franklin is an agent representing several colonies, and at the same time, an ardent supporter of the empire. He is finding that his role as mediator is becoming increasingly difficult.
I was born in America, and have lived a long time in England. There's nothing I want more than prosperity to both. I've written and talked so much on the subject that people are getting tired of hearing me.
He's trying to straddle the two sides that are emerging, and there really are two sides now. And the empire is a different thing for him, and he's grappling with this problem of how to hold it together.
In my most despairing moments, I think of that story of the sleeping man, dreaming about how to save his house. In his dreams, he mumbles, "Time is," and then "time was," and wakes up to find his house tumbling down around him and is heard to cry out, "The time is past."
I'm sorry to hear that your gout has returned, and that it's not in my power to be near enough to you to rub you with my light hand. When will it be in your power to come home? How I long to see you. I hope you won't stay longer than this fall. I find myself growing very feeble, very fast.
It is 1771. Franklin leaves London to spend 2 weeks at a friend's country estate. A portly 65-year-old, subject to episodes of painful gout, he too is beginning to feel his age. Looking out over this peaceful country scene, Franklin decides to write, for the first time, the story of his life.
He's depressed, he's dispirited. I think this is a really crucial moment in his life, and it's in those 6 months that he writes the first part of the autobiography.
He started it as a letter to his son. His son was putting on airs, was trying to become upper class. So Franklin starts off by saying, "Remember where we come from. I was a poor kid. I was a runaway. I had a few coins in my pocket when I came into Philadelphia for the first time."
Franklin presents himself as a role model. No soul-searching here, no searing personal confession, but a do-it-yourself manual on how to succeed in the world in an acceptable way.
This is a book of instruction for all those who have the patience and wit to take good advice that's generously offered.
I was 7 years old. It was a holiday, and my pockets were filled with coppers. I went directly to a shop, and being charmed with the sound of a whistle, I spent all my money on it. Delighted with my purchase, I whistled all over the house. Then my brothers and cousins began laughing at me for my folly, told me that I'd paid 4 times too much for it, and described all the other things I could have bought with the rest of my money. I began to cry. The thought of having wasted my money gave me more pain than the whistle gave me pleasure.
True to his good Puritan upbringing, Franklin draws the moral lesson from the story.
I grew up in the world and observed the actions of men. One, a miser, gave up a comfortable living and all the joys of benevolent friendship for the sake of accumulating wealth. "Poor man," I said, "you pay too much for your whistle." I see a sweet girl who married an ill-natured brute of a man because he was rich. What a pity, say I, that she should pay so much for a whistle. I think that humanity brings much misery on itself by the false value they put on things, by their giving away too much for the whistle.
The autobiography is the first great book of American literature, and in some ways the most important book, because of the way Franklin's own life incorporates the American dream, the rise from impotence to importance, from dependence to independence.
He's writing for America. He really means this to be something which will teach Americans how to live. I think that he sees Americans struggling for the soul of the continent, endlessly tempted by the possibilities of wealth, endlessly tempted by the open land, by the fortunes that you could make. And I think what he wants to tell Americans is, sure, You feel those surging desires. Sure, you want the wealth which is there apparently for the taking. I think he's saying that that's not all there is in life, and that you're going to perish if you make that all that there is in your life. You're going to tear each other apart. You're going to lose sight of the common life.
Boston, Massachusetts. The city had been under British occupation. Royal troops had fired on a crowd, and the people responded with cries of vengeance. Distrust of the crown is escalating, and Franklin fears that it will tear the empire apart.
He's trying to tell his American friends, just cool it, just remain dutiful, and we'll get through this tough time. But I don't think he fully appreciates just how enraged American opinion is becoming.
Franklin thinks that he can save the situation with a political dirty trick. He has been shown some letters written by Thomas Hutchinson, the royal governor of Massachusetts. The letters suggest that Hutchinson had called for the sending of British troops to Boston. Franklin decides to send copies of these incriminating letters to the Boston radicals. He hopes that Hutchinson will be blamed for all the troubles in New England.
What Franklin tries to do by communicating those letters is say, don't rebel against the king. Act against the governor. It's his fault. Remain loyal to the empire and throw out a badly functioning portion of it, that person.
It is Franklin's desperate attempt to save the empire.
He was profoundly attached to England. He loved the British Empire, which he called a precious china vase. He didn't want it broken. He didn't want the separation. And to the last minute, he was still trying to save it in some way.
As Franklin intended, sending the letters has shifted the anger of the colonists from the Crown to Hutchinson. The people of Massachusetts are now demanding his removal. William Franklin, the royal governor of New Jersey, is horrified.
Father, Governor Hutchinson is furious about the publications of his letters and his subsequent treatment by the people. He is gloomy and in low spirits. There's even talk of his leaving for England. Some here are saying it was you who sent the Hutchinson letters. Others say that it was Mr. Temple. I can only assume that it was Temple.
Rumors had been going around for a long time that Benjamin Franklin was the one who sent these letters. William had denied that it was true, believing that it was not true. He could not believe that his father would do such a dishonorable thing. His father finally wrote to him and he said that he was the one who had sent the letters to Massachusetts. William was crushed.
He confesses that it was him, at which point the British government goes ballistic.
There is reason to apprehend that this rebellion in America has been much promoted, nay, encouraged, by the treacherous correspondence, advice, and comfort given by wicked and desperate persons within this realm.
In England, it is not to be Thomas Hutchinson who will be blamed for the troubles in America, but Franklin himself. His role as a conciliator, his dreams of a great Anglo-American empire, everything he has worked for since he came to England 16 years earlier, is about to come crashing down around his head. Time is, time was, time becomes the past on Saturday afternoon, January 29th, 1774, when Franklin is called before His Majesty's Privy Council.
It must have been the darkest day in Franklin's life, the day he was called to what is known as the cockpit in Whitehall, the cockpit where they used to go for cockfights and where that day a Christian was going to be fed to the lion being the Solicitor General Alexander Wedderburn.
The doctor tells us that Mr. Hutchinson's letters had the effect of turning the mother country against her colonies. In truth, we have standing before us the real incendiary, the man behind those committees who are inflaming the whole province against His Majesty's government. They have well learned the lessons taught in Dr. Franklin's School of Politics.
People were laughing all the time, those lords, and he remained there like a statue, not a muscle in his face moving. It lasted a good hour, and for that good hour, he just stood there motionless.
Dr. Franklin stands as the planner, the inventor, the prime conductor of this whole contrivance against His Majesty's governor, this thief, this wily American.
A lot of politics is personal. He took it personally, and it was meant to be taken as such.
This was the turning point in Franklin's life. The man who had been so loyal to the empire, who came to England and stayed there and talked about ending his life in England, to be humiliated like this in front of this array of aristocrats, that made Benjamin Franklin a revolutionary.
Dear Debbie, you'll have heard by now that they have taken away my position as postmaster. The accusation is that I am too much attached to the interests of America. They intended to disgrace me. In fact, they have done me an honor. I expect to be at sea by the time you get this letter. You will find your pappy has become an old man, and it seems only yesterday that you and I were considered to be one of the boys and girls. So swiftly does time fly.
Christmas, 1774. Honored Father. Noon Monday, Mr. Bache sent his clerk with the news. My poor mother had died. She had had a stroke some time ago, and when I last saw her, she knew she didn't have much longer to live. I truly wish you had come back this fall. I think her sadness in not seeing you for so long preyed on her spirits.
In March of 1775, Franklin sails home to America. The death of his wife is only one of the many catastrophes engulfing him. What he once saw as that precious china vase, the Anglo-American Empire, is in the process of breaking apart. Almost as a relief, he revisits a scientific problem that has puzzled him for years. The fact that it takes several weeks longer to sail west to America than east to England. Taking a series of careful water temperature measurements as the ship crosses the Atlantic, he confirms the existence of a warm river of water within the ocean itself, the Gulf Stream. His accurate charting of the Gulf Stream becomes crucial to navigation and is basic to our understanding of weather patterns to this very day. April 19, 1775, the battles at Lexington and Concord. Franklin arrives in Philadelphia 2 weeks later to find the colonies in turmoil. He sees that most Americans are not eager for revolution. They are desperate to resolve their differences with the mother country. It is a beautiful spring day as William Franklin, the royal governor of New Jersey, rides through Philadelphia to meet his father. Father and son have not seen each other for 12 years. As the elder Franklin has become more radical, so the son has become more conservative.
He identified more and more with law and order as royal governor and saw the revolutionaries as crazies and dangerous. They would pull the whole structure down. Benjamin, on the other hand, thought the treatment that he personally had received in England was emblematic of the way America had been treated. I think the father feels that he can straighten his son out, and the son will be on the same side. He'll be with him.
Their meeting takes place at the country estate of an old friend and former political ally, Joseph Galloway.
Up to this moment, the elder Franklin had been very circumspect about expressing his real views to anyone. We passed the bottle around freely, and the doctor finally opened himself up to us. He declared himself in favor of any measure which would attain complete independence. He saw the government in power in England as thoroughly corrupt. And he felt that the resources of the colonies were immense. He was convinced America would prevail.
So we see them sitting around and passing the cup back and forth and drinking by the fire as the father recites his version of history. And we see William's anger developing, his resentment.
There are, in truth, only two possible paths. One which will lead to peace, the other to anarchy, misery, the horrors of a civil war.
England has become a place of injustice, bribes, and foolish quarrels. Our connection to that rotten old state corrupts and poisons us.
Nothing will ever influence me to neglect the duty which I owe to my country. Nor will the most furious rage of the most intemperate zealots lead me to swerve from the duty which I owe to His Majesty.
You say that your duty is to your king, and I shouldn't blame you for differing with me in public affairs. But there are natural duties of a son to a father which come before politics.
William will not be moved. He is an officer of the British Empire, and to the Empire he will remain loyal.
If it's your intention to set the colonies on fire, I hope you'll take care to run away and not get burned when the blaze is out of control.
You are a thorough courtier and see everything through the eyes of the British government.
He's loved William, and William is as close to him as anybody on the planet is. And there's William betraying him at the moment of his most desperate need, at the moment that he's shakiest probably in his entire life. Not at all certain of what he's about to undertake, not certain whether the Americans will even go for the revolution that he's now keen on.
When his own son refused to join him in this revolution in which Franklin was risking his life and his reputation and his property, this seemed to Franklin an absolutely unbelievable, unspeakable betrayal.
The elder Franklin will later describe his son's refusal to support him as giving him more grief than anything in the world.
He thought his son had betrayed him by taking the wrong side. For Franklin, there were no two ways about America's leaving England. There was not going to be any British Empire in which Americans were subject to Englishmen. That was not going to happen.
Franklin, 70 years old, now joins with the most radical leaders in America. He is promoting not just separation from England, but a revolutionary new idea that ordinary people can have control over their government, that America does not need a king. On June 25, 1776, Benjamin Franklin is in Philadelphia, working with John Adams and Thomas Jefferson on a draft of the Declaration of Independence.
I think that it is the natural right of men to quit when they please the society or state or the country in which they were born and either join with another or form a new one, as they may think proper.
On that same June day, in New Jersey, William Franklin is arrested by a government he adamantly refuses to recognize. He writes to his own son,
Dear son, I must go. I'm sick, but it was with great difficulty that I persuaded their low mightinesses to postpone my departure. Congress sent 2 doctors to make sure my illness was not feigned. Hypocrites always suspect hypocrisy in others. I must leave tomorrow, either dead or alive. God bless you. Be dutiful to your grandfather, to whom you owe many obligations.
William Franklin is thrown into prison and will end up an exile in England. The father had once made William an officer of the British Empire, and now it is the father who refuses to help his son in any way. Benjamin Franklin takes his anger with him to the grave, beyond the grave, for in his will, his once favorite son will get nothing.
You fought against me in the last war. I leave you nothing more of my estate than what you tried to deprive me of.
I don't think there's any question that Benjamin Franklin was a great statesman. And I have no question that he was a brilliant inventor. I think he was a wonderful journalist and writer. But I think he was very hard on family and friends. And no different than an awful lot of leaders who are put in the public eye, and we expect them to be saints in private as well as giants in public. Franklin destroys everything around him to create something new. He destroys the old British order. He destroys aristocracy. In the process of creating something new, he destroyed what was closest to him. His relationship with the person closer than anyone to him, his son.
The publisher, William Strawn, is a good friend of both men. He writes to Benjamin Franklin on the eve of the Revolution.
6 years ago, you predicted to me much of what has happened, but much of what you yourself did help fulfill this prophecy. And now you've carried things too far. There will be no end to the public calamities. I see many worthy, loyal men driven from their homes in America. I see pictures of misery and anarchy when the business is done. You could have continued in the exercise of study and in the company of fellow philosophers. Instead, in the evening of your life, you choose to embark upon this, the most arduous, dangerous, and uncertain cause that ever man has engaged in.
Explore the amazing life of Benjamin Franklin at PBS Online. Recreate famous experiments. Sample Ben's wit and wisdom, and discover how his ideas shape our world. Log on to pbs.org.